Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. All right, Steve, before we get into, demand and the potential acreage picture we could see out of USDA, you look back at 2022 and the dynamic market that we saw. So as now we head and really look at this 2023 market, how should growers reset their expectations?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, in 22, we saw three major events that could drive prices of South American drought that affected Brazil and Argentina, the war starting in Ukraine, which put the market into a spin, and then some drier conditions in the U.S. Midwest. So we had this kind of trifecta of things that push prices higher. Maybe all of those things will happen again this year, but the Brazilian South American yield is better than we thought. The war is getting to be old news, and so I think farmers need to dial down our expectations. We are not going to, if we're aiming for 22 crop prices in 23, we're going to wind up missing the mark. And I thought the USDA, and I don't give them a lot of credit, but in the Outlook conference, they came out with their expectations of where average prices would be for the 23 crop. And I think that's a smart thing for producers to look at and say, we'll do better than we did in 2020 or 2021. But if we're sitting around waiting to overachieve what we did last year, I think we're just going to come up missing all the opportunities.
Well, Steve, we'll see if you agree in this Prospective Plantings report that comes out next week. So, Jim, as we lead into that, a lot of acreage estimates coming out. The thought, though, that we could see more corn acres. When you look at what agmarket.net right now is projecting, what should growers be expecting heading into next week?
We're looking for more corn acres as well. We're looking for about 91 million acres. I mean, the reality is, as producers in the U.S., we're doing their books. It doesn't matter where they're at. You look for the southern part of Illinois, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, all the way to Nebraska. All our clients are all saying the same thing. Corn is where the money's at. So we are looking for more corn to be planted. Bean acres are going to be around 88, 89. As a whole, we do about 180 million acres of corn and beans combined, roughly. So the weight's definitely going to be on the corn this year.
So then, Floyd, when you look here in Ontario, I know some growers are still kind of on the fence, haven't made up their minds when it comes to acreage decisions, didn't have all of the, the things pre-booked like we typically do. But you look at the amount of risk. Does corn still pencil here as well? Corn
definitely is the best return. The reality up here, though, is with, as Steve alluded to, the big wheat acres, I imagine that all those wheat acres are going to be retained. So when we have planted acres provincially up 45% plus, Lambton County up 75%, something has to accommodate that increase in wheat acres. So we're anticipating that there will be lower corn acres and slightly lower to unchanged bean acres.
Well, corn demand, it seems like in the U.S. and Canada, similar story. Corn demand had been relatively soft. Jim, we've seen China come in and buy some corn now, at least from the U.S. Earlier this week, in a week's time, they had purchased 2.25 million tons of corn. What is the expectation for how many more buys we could see from China?
Our group is thinking it could be as many as 2 million more metric tons. So that would get close to 4. And if they did that, that would put China's total purchases for about 18 million metric tons, which is kind of the low end of the estimate of what the industry is. The real question is, are they going to buy more than that as uncertainty of the pricing? China does seem to be a value price type of buyer. With these break in prices recently, they've been very aggressive. So I think every kind of dip we get in the market, I would not be surprised to see China come in and step in and get a little bit more coverage done, as they're just worried about that safrinha crop maybe falling a little bit short.
Steve, everyone says China comes to the U.S. as a last resort. Not like relationships are great this week. It's not like things got any better. And so, Steve, when China does come to the U.S. to buy corn, do we see then, Canada backfill some of that demand globally? Does it shuffle a little bit, and does it end up helping Canada as well?
Certainly, anytime a big end user takes product, it's like taking water out of a barrel. It doesn't matter which side they took it out of. It drops the level in the whole barrel. So it's useful to us. Ontario corn tends to go to Europe. We're a real short boat ride out the St. Lawrence and across into Northern Europe. We really can't get to China. So yeah, it stops us from having to compete with American corn in the markets that we can get to. It's certainly useful for Ontario farmers to see China buying in a big way. 70% of the corn that China buys comes from the US. So it's kind of a funny relationship where they pretend they don't like each other, but somehow or another still do a lot of business, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Steve. It does cause whiplash as well. So, yeah. Well, Steve, Jim, Floyd, thank you so much for joining us this week from Grain Farmers of Ontario March Classic. We really appreciate it. We need to take a quick break, and then we'll have much more right here on U.S. Farm Report.